June 2nd, 1988, at about 4:30 in the afternoon. This just happened to be the last day of the week. A farmer had clipped a pole with his cultivator. We had a pole that was knocked over, and we had a little bit of a verbal conversation as to what we were going to do with this. What was decided is we were going to tie the line back. Being that it was 4 feet off the ground, we had to secure it. So we took an insulated stick, we put it on the line, and we proceeded to put a rope on the end of that insulated stick because the line itself was still hot at 14,400 volts. So in order to anchor it, we took another, what we call a temporary probe, and we drove it into the ground at about a 45-degree angle. So we used the rope to go from the insulated stick to the probe and tied it back to secure the line. It would, well, put the line roughly about a foot, foot and a half off the dirt, still energized. Well, back in the day, you didn't shut the power off until it was absolutely necessary. Came time, the hole's done, we latched onto the pole, put the pole into the ground, and comes time to make it square with the world. I was backing away from the digger, backing up, looking at the pole as I was backing up. I made a pivot to look at the line, and the field that I was walking on, it had been harrowed to the point where it's powder. So when I pivoted, my right foot dug into the soil, and I fell right on top of the line. It was like putting your head in one of the paint mixers and cranking it up to about 1,000. Then I fell clear of the line. I can remember driving down the road with my feet hanging out the window, and I was laying on one of the young kid's lap, and my feet felt like they were literally on fire, but the pain was horrible. When we finally arrived at the hospital, they threw you on a gurney and they started stripping you. I remember seeing my left foot, and it was like an ash gray. When you're sitting there in one moment looking down at the sheets and you see your feet sticking up, and then the next day you wake up in the recovery room and you look down and the sheets are flat, you definitely have different thoughts that run through your head. I can't walk. How is this going to happen? Whatever amount of voltage went down here, cauterized the blood vessels from here down. This is where they chose to remove this leg in order to get me mobile again. This is below knee because I still have my knee. Now on the right side, this is my leg. They figured based on the cauterizing that this was all that had to be removed. I was supposed to be married July 31st. The accident was June 4th. Kind of a tough way of getting married. She was amazing. She's one of the strongest women I know. She was a great comfort to me, as well as friends and family. I can't say enough. My mom and dad came out to see me from Ontario, and it's not a good thing for your mom to see. With my dad is also a lineman, and in any case, he's a pretty tough guy too. It was pretty emotional, to say the least. As I'm recovering, the head of Wascana came to pay me a visit. One of the questions he asked me was, what are your plans now being in your situation for the rest of your life? Have you given it any thought? I says, well, gonna basically climb poles because that's what I do for a living, and I'm gonna ride my motorcycle, and I like dancing, so I plan on doing dancing. And he kind of said, don't you think you're setting your goals a little high? And I said, you don't know me. That's pretty much what I needed to hear, which was a good shot in the arm to prove him wrong. I'm walking around on my plastic feet, basically getting used to those and how I'm going to transport myself around. And I had my welder buddy come over, and we grabbed my motorcycle, and we did a little retrofitting on my motorcycle. And basically within 3 months of my accident, I was riding my motorcycle. I told my wife, if we're going to get married, I'm not going down the aisle in a wheelchair. So we postponed it till October 1st of that year, 88, and I danced at my wedding. As far as climbing, I went to a machine shop in town, and I took my Klein hooks in there, and I said, here's what I want to do, and I need some kind of a locking mechanism. And they made it work. When you're standing in a socket that's made of plastic after fresh amputation, it's not like everything is not sensitive. So for me to take my weight for a long period of time was pretty tough. About 4 or 5 months, I was climbing with these legs. I spent about 20 years in the field doing what I did when just prior to my accident. I ran the trucks. I ran, like, shoveled in poles and built power line. There was times where you exert your leg and you get yourself a little bit of a sore, and a few times there it turned into a boil. I had to go to the doctor and get them lanced. Once they lance that, they got to put in cotton into the wound, and you're basically sitting on your backside for about 10 days until it heals, and then you just start all over again.
Sun was shining. It was in July of 1988. A storm rolled through the area. We worked all night Monday. We were asked to replace a capacitor on a capacitor bank. It was still wet everywhere. We had been replacing poles and been stuck multiple times. We didn't want to take the truck into where the pole was, so we were doing it off of spurs. I got up the pole, got into position about here, and from there I was able to use a 10-foot hot stick. So the cutout, I was able to open these two, no problem. I could not get around to this side of the pole. The pole was so chewed up, I wasn't confident on even being able to climb up there. So I had gone up this side of the pole. From there I was able to pull this riser and this riser because it was a little bit closer, but I still couldn't reach across to this riser. I realized I was going to have to get up higher on this pole to be able to reach it. This was the hazard here. Was this riser still being on? Even though this barrel was down, you normally wouldn't rely on your cutouts to be enough. You would take that additional step of removing a riser. So my partner, who was farther down the pole, he grounded these leads here. He also couldn't get around to that side of the pole. I had pulled those barrels out of the cutouts and had them on my belt, and we were now waiting for the capacitors to discharge before we were going to do anything else. And that was when I noticed that the cap was missing off of one of them. And that was the distraction that took me away from the plan of removing the risers before we would do anything. So this is the cutout, this is the top. The riser goes up to the primary, and then the bottom goes down to your equipment. And this was the little cap that was missing on it. So that cap falls in below this tension rod here, and that's what holds this together. I was higher with the fact that I could physically reach out with my hand and put a barrel into that cutout, but I did that without taking the riser off first, and that was how I got electrocuted. The partner that was up the pole with me, he lowered me to the ground using the pole top rescue. I then went to Pontex Hospital, where I was seen by the doctors there, and then I was moved from Pontex to Swift Current. I do remember waking up and seeing my wife looking at me and a couple of the nurses that I knew. From Swift Current, I was then taken to Saskatoon. From then, I spent 7 or 8 weeks in the burn unit. It was probably 4 to 5 weeks before I realized I would lose my arm. It took that long for the nerve damage to happen, to fully come to a conclusion on it. And that was when I realized I didn't have any feeling in my arm below the wrist at all. So this is what they call a prosthesis with a farmer's hook on it. So it opens and closes. The new arm that I have actually has a bolt within it that holds the prosthesis on, and it doesn't slide off. So this is the sleeve you use, and this is where mine was cut off, was right here. So there is some fair bit of scarring from where they did the amputation and created what they call a stump part of it. As far as sensations, like, even though my nerves don't work, I still feel everything in my arm. It just feels shorter. This one here, I can open and close all my fingers, it feels like, but it does go away when I look at it. Then my brain tells me that it's not there. The first 4 or 5 months of my amputation, when I would shave or look into a mirror, I had to step to the side because it just felt very, I would become very anxious when I would look and see my arm wasn't there. For some reason, it was very hard for the brain to accept. One of my biggest problems was putting socks on when I was first injured, until I learned how to hook the big toe. So if anybody wants to try it, they can try putting their socks on with one hand. Carpentry work, I would have to learn how to make a jig or something to hold on to something. The one big advantage though is you can use your hook as a push stick, and you don't have to worry about it. It is rather hard on saw blades, so I did discover. So this is how I set up the golf here now. So I get the golf shoes on, and I pull out the hook. So what it does is it replaces the feeling of your hand. This reacts as if it's your wrist. I realized I could still do things. I ran into those instances multiple times of the positive effects of it happening. It would have been 6 or 7 months before I actually returned to work. You know, even just putting on your spurs all of a sudden was a different task than it was. I was able to climb up a pole, do minimal switching and stuff like that, but my arm would get very cold easily because of the lack of circulation in it. Then I talked more with workers' compensation about what options I had. I think they went above and beyond to get me through electrical technology school. Now I work virtually on paper sort of thing to build power lines.